Up to now, Daniel has given an account of his rise in Babylon and subsequent appointment in leadership positions over the early administration of the Medo-Persian Empire. Things are about to change. For the remainder of Daniel, he reveals prophecies that would span for centuries and even millenniums. 2 of them he received while he was living under Babylonian control, and the other 2 visions under the rule of 2 Persian kings. During the last 6 chapters, he reveals dreams and visions, which would affect both Gentile empires and their dominant role over Jerusalem and the Jewish race. Every vision contains deep symbolism, which is either interpreted in the section or carries a meaning from other scriptures in the Bible. For one to understand prophecy, as in the case of chapter 2, you need a thorough knowledge of both symbolism in the Bible and some historical context.
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions in his mind on his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the summary of it. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the sky broke forth on the great sea. 4 great animals came up from the sea, different from one another.
So we learn that while Daniel was laying on his bed, he had a dream followed by multiple visions, expanding upon it when he awoke. When the vision subsided, he immediately wrote the summary of what he had seen and the many details of the dream. Since the opening verse is written in the 3rd person, it is likely that he explained the details to a scribe who preserved the record of events. We believe this because in verse 2, the account switches back to Daniel's 1st person account and is the probable explanation. At the death of King Nebuchadnezzar, it was King Nabonidus who took to the throne. He was an adventurous king who, according to the Babylonian chronicles, appointed Belshazzar, his son, as the co-regent king while he was away on development projects, expanding and beautifying his kingdom. The first year of King Belshazzar's effective reign confirms the account as occurring in 553 BC. From a context perspective, it is with certainty we can say that this vision chronologically occurred between the events of chapter 4 concerning the great tree and the fall of Babylon in chapter 5. In his dream, Daniel observed 4 winds descending on a great sea, resulting in it turning stormy and turbulent. Since the Great Sea in the Mediterranean is often associated with the land of Israel in the Bible, some scholars believe this is it. However, it is doubtful that a specific location is to be identified by the words the Great Sea. Now, the sea is used throughout prophecy as a symbol or metaphor of evil or corruption. Isaiah prophesied of a great sea monster, Leviathan, as being a great source of evil, which will be destroyed when God establishes his physical eternal kingdom on the earth. He also associated the raging of the sea with the nations of the world challenging God. Then there is Jeremiah, who described Egypt's rage, likening it to the rivers of surging water. Certainly not exhaustive, another application of the sea is the great prostitute of Revelation, the religious system of the last days, who is described as sitting on many waters, representing people, multitudes, nations, and languages. The visual startled him, as you observe 4 winds of the sky causing chaos on the great sea. They are a supernatural element and are typically used in scriptures to show God's judgment on mankind. In Revelation, we also see the angels holding back 4 winds on the release of the 6th seal judgment, and with their release, it brings carnage. Generally, in visions, dreams, and other apocalyptic writings, the sea is usually a symbol of rebellious man, while the winds are symbolic of judgment, ending times and seasons of kingdoms and their very existence. We are able to understand from Daniel's opening description that from the churning of the masses of humanity, 4 great wild animals emerge from the depths of the sea, all different from each other. Daniel is about to describe the nature of each of these wild animals. Embedded in the whole interpretation of Daniel is that all these wild animals indicate kingdoms which arise and rebel against God, ushering in the changes of time, resulting in God establishing His physical, eternal kingdom on the earth. Now let us consider the finer details of each of these four creatures. The lion with eagle's wings.
The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I saw until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand on 2 feet as a man, and a man's mind was given to it.
A lion as an animal is symbolic of royal power. We see this association where King Solomon had images of 12 lions on either sides of the steps leading up to his throne. As eagle wings are attached to its back, and it often portrays military speed and agility, it describes the swiftness of this kingdom. But then to our surprise, and most likely Daniel's, it was standing on its 2 feet. As a lion's effectiveness and power is driven from being on its large 4 paws, standing on 2 feet implies a loss in strength and power. Finally, with a mind being given to it, it implies that it has a logical and thoughtful approach to its conquests and does not just roam around and destroy. The bear with 3 ribs.
And behold, another animal, a second one, like a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and the 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And they said this to it, Arise, devour much flesh.
The bear as the second animal or kingdom in the vision is known for its aggression. It will stand and use its huge paws to strike one down and then maul the victim apart with powerful blows and bites in an exceptionally brutal manner. Its lopsided nature has drawn 2 possible interpretations. As we know, it relates to a kingdom. It either speaks of its composition or makeup that makes it lopsided, or it means the bear attracts a wound and is favoring the one side. With one of the most powerful bites amongst animals, it has 3 ribs stuck between its teeth. Since this bear is symbolic of a kingdom, it is apparent that the ribs reflect territories gained. It is worth noting they are recent gains and have not even been digested yet. Finally, it has been instructed to devour much flesh, which confirms not only its brutality and aggressive nature, but that it is responsible for much death. The leopard with 4 heads.
After this I saw, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The animal also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
Now this third animal or kingdom is highly unusual. It has 4 heads, which if we apply the basic apocalyptic meaning, it implies it's the makeup of 4 smaller kingdoms. We already explained the nature of 4 wings with the lion, so 4 wings indicate it is swift and agile in its military maneuvers, and supports understanding of the 4 heads. In other words, there are 4 distinct military components to this third kingdom, and they are all capable of operating independently. Lastly, dominion is given to it, implying that this is not an ordinary kingdom. As we know, all kingdoms acquire their territory through brute force. Now we get to the 4th and last animal, which is absolutely terrifying.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th animal, awesome and powerful, and extremely strong, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet, and it was diverse from all the animals that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
So although Daniel describes the elements of this beast kingdom, it was like no other experienced in history. Instead, he used the words awesome, powerful, and further emphasized that it is incredibly powerful. The huge teeth devoured and broke in pieces its adversaries. Whatever was left, the feet broke and crushed under its weight and might. The one thing which stands out about this fourth beast is its horns. Since the many details of the prophecies are fairly complex and are woven together with an interpretation given by Daniel, we need to understand first the keys to unlock the vision. A beast, or wild animals, are symbolic of major kingdoms of the world. We see this recurring theme here and in chapter 8. Virtually every Christian scholar regards these beasts as symbolic of kingdoms, since it is confirmed in the very next text by Daniel, where he says, "These great animals which are four kings, who shall arise out of the earth." And we all know that a king has a kingdom. A horn is symbolic of a prominent ruler or king in charge of a kingdom or empire. Then there is a head, which is also symbolic of a dominant world kingdom or empire and can also mean the king in charge, depending on its context. Let's see what Daniel says concerning the little horn as a prominent ruler. The emergence of a little horn.
I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking arrogant things.
Since we know that a horn refers to a prominent ruler of a kingdom, it is rather surprising that a new ruler emerges from between the ranks of the 10 and forcibly removes 3 of the existing rulers, and thereby effectively takes control of their empire. Their complete removal is amplified with the words that they were plucked up by their roots. Since the horns themselves are identified in verse 24 as both kings and a further subdivision in kingdoms, it is not surprising that this 11th horn has eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking arrogant things. This is certainly not the only place where we find references to a prominent horn as being symbolic of a king. In the very next chapter, King Alexander the Great is described as a prominent horn. This is followed by the little horn, which many regard is the same as the little horn here. John, in his apocalyptic writings recorded in Revelation, also refers to a prominent ruler or little horn who is destroyed shortly before the second coming of Christ. Now, before we unpack and provide the various interpretation of these kingdoms, let us first complete the context by observing another vision Daniel describes as occurring in the heavenly realms, after the kingdoms have revealed themselves together with their prominent rulers. The heavenly vision.
I saw until thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands of thousands ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I saw at that time because of the voice of the arrogant words which the horn spoke. I was watching until the animal was killed and its body destroyed and was given to be burnt with fire. As for the rest of the animals, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time.
It is for the first time that the phrase Ancient of Days is mentioned, and it is used 3 times, all in this chapter. In the book of Isaiah, God the Father described himself as from Ancient of Days, implying he existed before days and time began. So this forms a basis of a brief description given of God, but be rest assured, many of the features described carry symbolic meaning. So let's have a look at the clothing of God. It is described as incredibly bright and described as white as snow. The color white has a long history of being symbolic for purity, holiness, righteousness, wisdom, and dignity. These are the first traits of God emphasized. In a similar fashion, his hair like pure wool is symbolic also of the natural color white. Jesus is described in similar terms in the opening vision of Revelation chapter 1. In the Middle Eastern culture, white hair itself is highly symbolic of wisdom, deserving of respect and honor. Now we have a picture of who is sitting on the throne and his level of righteousness. Daniel quickly introduces us to other images, providing its full context. Fire is present in all the other elements, including the throne itself, described as fiery flames, the wheels burning with fire, and a fiery stream coming before God. When Ezekiel describes the wheels of fire, he described it as God's consuming energy and his eagerness to pass swift judgment. While fire has over 500 references in the Bible, it is in many cases associated with God's judgment. So the complete picture of this heavenly vision is one of God's righteousness versus his judgment. In this vision, God's judgment is about to be spent. The scene of judgment is remarkably similar to the scene described in Revelation chapters 4 and 5. The phrase 10,000 upon 10,000 refers to a number that cannot be counted, consisting of worshippers and ministers standing before the throne. So the time of judgment has been set and the books are finally opened. While some set the scene as occurring before eternity at the great white throne judgment, the entire context of this chapter rather speaks to the judgment of the nations and not the final judgment. Isaiah the prophet was one of many who describes God as rising up, bringing all the nations of the world under his submission long before final judgment is passed. Final judgment only concurs at the conclusion of the millennium reign of Christ. This appears to be referring to this judgment, known as the judgment of the nations, which leads to the second coming. It is here that the little horn, with his arrogant words, receives justice, and together with a final beast-like kingdom, is destroyed and handed over into eternal fire. Now what is very interesting, and will affect many an interpretation, is the fact that all the other animals are said to last for a season and a time, while they had no further control or authority over the earth. Having been exposed to the elements of Daniel's dream, the 4 wild animals, an introduction to the little horn, and the 4th animal's destruction at the hands of God, let us examine the traditional conservative interpretation of these 4 kingdoms. Now, regardless of one's theology, how one interprets the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 is generally how these 4 beasts are understood. Traditionally, the lion is associated with the head of the statue and is believed to be Babylon, while the bear is aligned to the chest and arms of silver and is traditionally assigned to the kingdoms of the Medes and Persians. The Grecian Empire is then assigned to the belly and thighs of bronze. Finally, the beast is assigned in 2 parts, the iron teeth to the iron legs of the statue, which is assigned to the Roman Empire. In its final form with 10 horns and feet, to the revised or revived Roman Empire, or one world government, before Christ returns to destroy all man-made kingdoms. Generally, they understand the vision of Daniel chapter 2 as being from man's perspective, and the traditional belief is that this vision in chapter 7 is from God's perspective. The man-made kingdoms are nothing but wild animals or beasts. Let us dig deeper into each to show this traditional interpretation. So the stand-up lion is deemed to be Babylon, as the kingdom has already been decided by those of chapter 2. Also, Babylon is famous for their lion art and statues outside palace buildings. Since eagle's wings refer to agility and swiftness in conquering, this is attributed to it conquering the vast Assyrian Empire over a period of 17 years. Finally, the mind being given to the lion is seen as a parallel reference to King Nebuchadnezzar losing his mind and then regaining prominence after the elapse of 7 years in the vision of the great tree recorded in chapter 4. So once the links to the statue has been predetermined, it is natural that the kingdom coming after Babylon can only be the historical Medo-Persian Empire. And of course, in support of the traditional interpretation, its lopsided nature portrays the duality of this empire, in which Persia was substantially larger than the Medes and eventually took over the joint empire completely. The command to the bear to devour much flesh is aligned to the historic, aggressive and barbaric nature of this empire and their constant attacks on neighbors such as Babylon, Egypt and Greece. While there are two differing options given by the traditionalist interpretation, the three ribs is believed to refer to some of the conquered territories of Lydia, Babylon and Egypt. The leopard in turn is associated and aligned with the image of Daniel chapter 2 with the belly and thigh of bronze, since it was the Grecian Empire who conquered the Persians in 336 BC. This empire did not last long, since King Alexander died, and at his death the empire was divided into 4 different kingdoms. These are believed to refer to the 4 heads of the leopard and their military swiftness to the 4 wings, as they were 4 separate kingdoms with their own militaries. While the phrase dominion was given to it remains obscure, this is seen as God giving King Alexander the Great the keys to stop the Persian aggression. As mentioned a few times now, since these animals are traditionally viewed as the kingdoms of the image of chapter 2, the 4th beast is automatically divided into 2 parts. The first phase with the iron teeth is directly linked to the legs of iron and assigned to the Roman Empire. Just as the huge iron teeth is described as devouring and breaking everything in pieces, so the Romans were known for wiping out entire civilizations in extremely cruel and ferocious ways. Concerning this 4th beast, the diversity in it having 10 horns and feet trampling on what remains is directly associated with the 2 feet of 10 toes of chapter 2, and this is traditionally interpreted as the final world empire, which Christ destroys at his second coming. Bringing it all back together, one observes a complete picture of the traditional conservative interpretation of these beasts described by Daniel and the alignment to the image received in the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar. This prophecy is certainly complex and takes a fair amount of concentration and pondering to absorb all of its finer details. Yet, there are still some very interesting matters revealed concerning these 4 beasts. An alternative modern-day futuristic interpretation and the rise of a prominent ruler will still be investigated and explained. For now, we will calm down and allow thoughts to galvanize. See you in the next episode, where we continue our journey through the 4 beasts of Daniel chapter 7. Until next time, Maranatha.